Have you ever had one of those moments when a great idea suddenly appears in your mind? Maybe you're trying to solve a problem, and you've been thinking about it for hours. Nothing seems to work. You take a break, go for a walk, make some coffee, take a shower, or simply stop thinking about it for a while. And then suddenly, there it is. The answer, the idea, the connection you couldn't see before. It can almost feel like your brain created something out of nowhere. But the truth is, your mind is doing something incredibly interesting. Your brain is constantly observing, connecting, organizing, imagining, testing, and rearranging information. And creativity is not something reserved for artists, musicians, writers, inventors, or people who seem naturally imaginative. Creativity is a human ability. You use it every day. Whenever you find a different way to solve a problem, think of a better approach, explain something in your own words, make a decision, decorate your home, prepare a meal for whatever ingredients you have, organize your schedule, or imagine a better future for yourself. You're using creativity. Creativity isn't simply about producing paintings or writing songs. Creativity is the ability to see possibilities. It's the ability to look at what already exists and wonder, what else could this become? It's the ability to notice connections between things that don't initially seem connected. It's the willingness to ask questions. It's the courage to experiment. And perhaps most importantly, it's the ability to move beyond the first obvious answer. Your mind doesn't have to remain stuck in old patterns. You can become more curious. You can become more flexible in the way you think. You can become more comfortable exploring possibilities. And as you do, you may begin noticing something wonderful. Ideas start coming more easily. Problems begin to look different. You become more willing to experiment. You stop assuming that there's only one correct way to do something. You begin looking for the second possibility, and then the third, and sometimes the 10th. That is where creative thinking becomes powerful. Because the first idea isn't always the best idea. Sometimes you need to give your mind permission to explore. Imagine walking into a room you've been in hundreds of times. At first, you see exactly what you've always seen. The furniture, the walls, the windows, the objects. Nothing appears different. But now imagine someone asks you to find 10 things you've never noticed before. Suddenly, your attention changes. You start looking at the corners, the patterns, the shadows, the details. You notice how the light enters through the window. You notice the texture of the furniture. You notice a small object sitting on a shelf that you've somehow ignored for years. The room didn't change. Your attention changed. And this is one of the most important ideas about creativity. Sometimes creativity isn't about creating something from nothing. Sometimes it's about noticing what was already there. Your mind contains enormous amounts of information, experiences, conversations, books, movies, mistakes, successes, questions, memories, observations, things you've learned years ago, things you've forgotten you learned. And your brain can combine pieces of this information in surprising ways. One experience can influence another. An idea from yesterday can connect with something you learned 10 years ago. A problem you've been struggling with can suddenly become easier after encountering an unrelated idea. This is why curiosity is so valuable. Curiosity gives your brain more material to work with. The more you explore, the more connections become possible. And you don't have to become an expert at everything. You simply have to remain interested. Ask questions. Read something different. Listen to someone with a different perspective. Try something you've never tried. Take a different route. Change your routine occasionally. Look at familiar things from unfamiliar angles. Give yourself permission to wonder. Because a curious mind is an active mind. And an active mind has more possibilities available to it. Think about a child for a moment. Children ask questions constantly. Why is the sky blue? Why does this happen? What would happen if I did this? Why can't we do it another way? What is that? How does this work? Children don't always worry about whether their questions sound intelligent. They simply want to understand. They explore. They experiment. They imagine. They make connections. And somewhere along the way, many adults begin doing less of this. We become concerned with being right. We become concerned with looking intelligent. We become concerned with making mistakes. We become concerned with what other people might think. And these concerns can quietly limit creativity. Because creativity requires exploration. And exploration naturally includes uncertainty. You cannot know exactly where an idea will lead before you explore it. You cannot guarantee that every experiment will work. You cannot know whether every thought will become something useful. And that's perfectly okay. A creative mind doesn't require every idea to be brilliant. It simply needs the freedom to generate ideas. This is a powerful distinction. You don't have to judge an idea while you're creating it. You can create first and evaluate later. Imagine trying to build a house while constantly criticizing every brick before placing it. You would make the process incredibly difficult. Creative thinking works better when you separate creation from judgment. First, explore. Then, evaluate. First, generate possibilities. Then decide which possibilities deserve your attention. This simple change can make thinking feel much easier. Instead of asking yourself immediately, "Is this a good idea?" you can ask, "What else could work? What if I approached this differently? What haven't I considered? What would happen if I reversed the usual approach? What would I try if I knew I couldn't fail? What would I do if I had to solve this with half the resources? What would someone completely different from me suggest?" These questions open doors. And sometimes the most interesting ideas appear after you've moved beyond the obvious answers. Let's say you're facing a difficult problem. Your first instinct might be to search for the correct solution. But perhaps there isn't one single correct solution. Perhaps there are several workable solutions. One may be faster. Another may be cheaper. Another may be simpler. Another may be more enjoyable. Another may create an entirely new opportunity. Creative thinking allows you to expand the field of possibilities before narrowing it down. This is why brainstorming can be so useful. The goal isn't to produce perfect ideas. The goal is to produce possibilities. You might generate 10 ideas and discover that 8 are not useful. That's okay. Maybe one is interesting. Maybe another leads to something better. Maybe 2 ideas can be combined. And perhaps one of those combinations becomes the solution you were looking for. This is how creativity often works. Not as one magical flash of genius, but as a process of exploration. Idea, connection, experiment, adjustment, another idea, another connection, and eventually, something clicks. You may have experienced this yourself. Perhaps you've struggled to write something. You couldn't find the right words. Then you stopped forcing it. Later, while doing something completely unrelated, the perfect sentence appeared in your mind. Or maybe you were trying to remember someone's name. You couldn't. You stopped thinking about it. And suddenly, hours later, the name appeared. Your brain continued working in the background. This is one reason breaks can be so valuable. Rest isn't always the opposite of productivity. Sometimes stepping away gives your mind the space it needs to reorganize information. When you stop consciously forcing a solution, your mind can continue making connections. This is why a walk can sometimes produce better ideas than staring at a screen. Why a shower can become surprisingly productive. Why ideas can appear while you're driving, exercising, cooking, or simply relaxing. Your conscious mind doesn't have to control every stage of the creative process. Sometimes the best thing you can do is give your mind room. Room to wander. Room to explore. Room to connect. Room to imagine. And this brings us to another important part of creativity. Daydreaming. Daydreaming is often treated as wasted time. But imagination has an important role in human thinking. When your mind wanders, it can explore possibilities that aren't directly connected to your immediate surroundings. You can imagine conversations, future situations, different outcomes, new projects, different versions of yourself. You can mentally rehearse possibilities before they happen. And this ability to imagine something that doesn't currently exist is one of the foundations of creativity. Every invention began as an idea that did not yet exist in physical form. Every building began as an idea. Every business began as an idea. Every book began as an idea. Every song began as an idea. Every new solution began as an idea. The physical world around you contains countless examples of human imagination becoming reality. And that means imagination isn't useless. It is the beginning of creation. You don't need to know exactly how an idea will become real before allowing yourself to imagine it. You can start with the possibility. You can ask, what if? What if there were a simpler way? What if this problem were actually an opportunity? What if I looked at this from the opposite perspective? What if the limitation I'm seeing isn't as permanent as I think? What if I combine these two ideas? What if I started again? What if is one of the most powerful questions a creative mind can ask. And you can use it anywhere. In your work, in your relationships, in your home, in your hobbies, in your personal growth, in your plans for the future. Instead of automatically accepting this is how things are done, you can become curious about whether another way exists. This doesn't mean rejecting everything that already works. It simply means staying open to improvement. A creative person doesn't necessarily dislike the old way. They simply wonder whether there might also be a new way. And that mindset can change everyday life. Consider how many inventions were created because someone looked at an ordinary inconvenience and thought, there has to be an easier way. That sentence contains creativity. An inconvenience becomes a question. The question becomes an experiment. The experiment becomes a solution. And the solution can eventually become something useful to many people. You don't have to invent something revolutionary to benefit from this mindset. You can use it in small ways. How can you organize your morning more efficiently? How can you make your workspace more comfortable? How can you communicate something more clearly? How can you make a difficult task easier? How can you turn a boring routine into something enjoyable? How can you use something you already own in a different way? How can you approach a disagreement from a different perspective? Small creative improvements accumulate, and they teach your mind something important. There are options. You're not always trapped with the first solution. You can look again. You can think again. You can try again. You can change direction. You can experiment. This flexibility is incredibly valuable because life rarely follows a perfectly predictable path. Plans change. People change. Circumstances change. Unexpected problems appear. And when your thinking is flexible, change doesn't automatically mean disaster. It becomes something you can respond to. You can ask, okay, what are my options now? That question is powerful. Instead of focusing entirely on what went wrong, you begin searching for what can happen next. This is creative problem solving, and it can make you more resilient. Because resilience isn't only about enduring difficulty. It's also about finding new ways forward. Sometimes the original plan doesn't work. That doesn't mean there is no path. It may simply mean the path needs to change. Think about a river. A river doesn't stop flowing because a rock is in its way. It moves around it. It finds another route. It continues forward. Your thinking can become more like that. Flexible, adaptable, curious, open. When one approach doesn't work, you could try another. When one door closes, you can look for another entrance. When one idea fails, you can learn from it and generate another. Failure can actually become information. And information can become creative fuel. This is another reason not to fear mistakes. A mistake tells you something. It tells you what didn't work. It may reveal an assumption that was incorrect. It may expose a weakness in your approach. It may point you toward a better solution. When you treat mistakes as information rather than evidence that you're incapable, your relationship with creativity changes. You become more willing to experiment. And experimentation is essential to discovery. Think of some of the greatest discoveries in history. Many happened because people were willing to test something. They observed what happened. They adjusted. They tried again. They learned. They refined. Creativity isn't always a straight line from idea to success. Often it's a winding path, and that's normal. You don't have to get everything right on the first attempt. You can improve an idea. You can revise it. You can simplify it. You can combine it with something else. You can completely change it. An idea doesn't have to be perfect to be useful. Sometimes an imperfect idea is simply the beginning of a better one. So allow yourself to create rough drafts, rough thoughts, rough plans, rough experiments. You can polish them later. This applies to writing, business, art, problem solving, relationships, and almost every area of life. The pressure to be perfect can make the mind cautious. The permission to experiment makes the mind curious. And curiosity creates movement. Another powerful way to strengthen creative thinking is to expose yourself to different perspectives. Imagine hearing 5 people describe the same event. Each person might notice something different. One notices the emotions. Another notices the facts. Another notices the environment. Another notices the possibilities. Another notices the problem. None of them necessarily sees the entire picture. Together, however, they may create a much richer understanding. This is why listening to different perspectives can be so valuable. You don't have to agree with everyone. You don't have to adopt every opinion. You simply allow yourself to understand how someone else sees the world. This expands your mental library, and a larger mental library gives you more material for creative connections. You can also practice looking at familiar problems from different roles. Ask yourself, what would a scientist notice? What would an artist notice? What would an entrepreneur notice? What would a teacher notice? What would a child notice? What would someone seeing this problem for the first time notice? Changing the perspective can change the possibilities. And sometimes the solution appears because you stopped looking at the problem in exactly the same way. This is the beauty of mental flexibility. You don't need to become a completely different person. You simply become capable of looking through more than one window. Imagine your mind as a room with many windows. One window shows logic. Another shows imagination. Another shows emotion. Another shows experience. Another shows curiosity. Another shows intuition. Another shows possibilities. The more windows you can open, the more complete your view becomes. Creativity often happens when these different forms of thinking work together. Logic can help you determine whether an idea is practical. Imagination can generate possibilities. Experience can provide useful knowledge. Curiosity can ask better questions. Observation can reveal details. Intuition can sometimes point your attention towards something worth exploring. You don't have to choose only one. A creative mind can use all of them, and you can become more comfortable moving between different modes of thought. There are times to focus deeply. There are times to brainstorm. There are times to analyze. There are times to step away. There are times to gather information. There are times to simply observe. Knowing when to switch modes can make thinking more effective. And you can begin practicing this intentionally. When you're solving a problem, don't immediately demand an answer. First, understand the problem. Then generate possibilities. Then evaluate. Then experiment. Then adjust. This simple cycle can be applied to almost anything. And the more you practice it, the more natural it can become. Your brain learns through repetition. When you repeatedly approach challenges with curiosity, you reinforce that style of thinking. When you repeatedly ask better questions, asking better questions becomes easier. When you repeatedly explore alternatives, exploring alternatives becomes more natural. When you repeatedly experiment, instead of immediately giving up, experimentation becomes less intimidating. You're teaching yourself a new way to respond, not through pressure, through practice. And this is something worth remembering. You don't have to force yourself to become creative. You can create conditions where creativity has room to appear. Give yourself interesting input. Give yourself quiet moments. Give yourself permission to explore. Give yourself time. Give yourself variety. Give yourself the freedom to make mistakes. Give yourself opportunities to play with ideas. And give yourself permission not to know the answer immediately. Not knowing can actually be the beginning of discovery. Sometimes we become uncomfortable when we don't have an answer. But uncertainty can be an open space. It means the possibilities haven't been decided yet. Instead of thinking, I don't know, you can sometimes add, I don't know yet. Those two words can change the feeling completely. I don't know yet leaves the door open. It creates possibility. It reminds you that the absence of an answer right now doesn't mean an answer doesn't exist. Maybe you simply haven't discovered it. Maybe you need more information. Maybe you need a different perspective. Maybe you need a rest. Maybe you need to experiment. Maybe the answer will appear when you least expect it, so you can become comfortable with the process. Question, explore, imagine, experiment, observe, adjust, discover, repeat. This is how creative ability grows. And there is another side of creativity that is often overlooked. Creativity can make life more enjoyable. When you begin seeing possibilities everywhere, ordinary experiences can become more interesting. A walk becomes an opportunity to observe. A conversation becomes an opportunity to learn. A problem becomes a puzzle. A mistake becomes information. A blank page becomes an invitation. An empty afternoon becomes open space. A routine becomes something you can improve. The world becomes less like a fixed collection of objects and more like a collection of possibilities. You begin noticing things differently. You might see a color combination and suddenly imagine how it would look somewhere else. You might hear an interesting phrase and remember it later. You might notice how someone solves a problem and wonder whether their approach could help you with something completely different. You begin collecting little pieces of inspiration, and you don't need to know where they will lead. Some ideas can simply sit in your mental library. One day, something may connect them. This is why keeping notes can be useful. When an interesting thought appears, write it down. Don't assume you'll remember it later. A small idea today may become important months from now. You might write down a question, a phrase, a business idea, a solution, a design, a possibility, a lesson, a strange observation, anything that catches your attention. You're essentially giving your future mind more material to work with. And over time, you may notice patterns. You may realize that certain subjects keep appearing in your thoughts. Certain problems interest you. Certain questions won't leave you alone. Pay attention to those patterns. They may point toward areas where your curiosity naturally wants to go. Creativity isn't always about forcing yourself to think harder. Sometimes it's about paying attention to what naturally interests you. Interest creates energy. When you're genuinely interested in something, you naturally ask more questions. You notice more details. You remember more. You explore further. You stay with the subject longer. And all of this gives your brain more opportunities to create connections. You don't need to turn every interest into a career or a project. Sometimes curiosity can simply be curiosity, Learning something because it's interesting is valuable in itself, and you never know when seemingly unrelated knowledge will become useful. A person who knows about many different subjects may have more opportunities to connect those subjects in unusual ways. This is one reason lifelong learning can be so powerful. You don't have to learn everything. Just keep learning something. Every new experience adds another piece to the mental puzzle. And sometimes the most creative ideas come from combining things that already exist. Great ideas often aren't completely disconnected from everything that came before. And this means you don't have to wait for a completely original thought to appear. Great ideas are often built from small ones. And a mind that remains curious can keep discovering them again and again, day after day, in ordinary moments, in unexpected moments, in moments of challenge, in moments of stillness. There is always another perspective, another possibility, another question, another way forward. And perhaps that is one of the most beautiful things about the human mind. It doesn't have to accept the world exactly as it is. It can imagine what could be, and then it can begin creating it. One thought, one choice, one experiment, one possibility at a time.